my very informative and exciting tapes and recorded soap operas over it and gave it back to me. So, Peggy, all I can say is paybacks are a bitch. There goes Joe. Is this beautiful or what? Is this beautiful? There goes Lampion. Whee! Oh no! I love it. I just thought that footage was great. Hey, Joe, Peggy, hey, no more soap operas on my tapes. All right, back to reality here. Hope you didn't mind. Hey, just kidding. Just kidding, Joe. I know you volunteered to judge the gnats, but just kidding. Anyway, on to Strega. See, no hard feelings here. Now, this is funny. I got to tell you this. My wife abuses the hell out of me. Debbie Borelli abuses me. Check this out. You think that's bad? Look at this. This is Dave Midgley's wife giving me a haircut at the 88 Nats. Unbelievable. I take all this abuse. I get no respect. Unbelievable. Look at those nice legs. Now today I want to run a little test on here. And since there's, you know what we've been doing? We've been waiting for it to dry and then doing little spots to see if the paint is really dry enough and mostly hard enough to sand. Now keep in mind the bottom of this plane has a lot less clear on it. Maybe 30, 40, maybe even 50%. It's not really a super accurate thing. It has less paint on it. So I think one of the things I can do right now is get out the old stand for the plane. And let's look at some of the spots on the bottom, way we could run a little test and maybe even get a little bit sanded out today. We'll see how much we can get sanded out. Now the old stand gives us one of the options that I really like, is having this foam stand here. And I'll start on the bottom of the stab. That's a real easy spot, and it's the spot that probably has the least amount of paint on the whole plane. And I'll kind of work my way forward then. The nose, of course, has the most paint, so you want to go from the driest spot to what we think will be the wettest spot. And probably the last spot, or further on into this, depending on how this sands out, the letters have the most amount of clear on them, and we'll try to get them last. Now, it goes without saying, not going to use any kind of sandpaper on here any rougher than 1200 from this point on. If you use 600, yeah, you can knock it down, but you still get little microscopic scratches. The 1200 is my choice. I really would like to eliminate any or all of the scratches. And what you find out at this point in the finish is you really shouldn't have a very time-consuming thing. If you've done all the sanding, all the steps along the way, right now the buff out and the sand out, the only thing that's a pain in the neck is if you really want to try to rush this. And if we see this is gumming up on the sandpaper, obviously we're going to just back down, wait a couple more days. There really is no rush. We're nowhere near the point in time when we could go flying. By the way, I just went down, this is interesting information, I just went down and bought another gallon of M600, and it's gone up another $6 a gallon in price, And the guy at Chard told me he may not even be able to get it anymore thanks to the EPA. So if there's anybody out there has some other sources of M600, we may be looking for one real soon. I don't know. I think Ron found the source, Ron Kiefer, by the way, found the source out by him. And I don't know what the price was, but it's just getting ridiculous here in the New York City area. Not that everything in the world of stunt gets ridiculous. As soon as something works well, they discontinue it right away. Heaven forbid we should have it easy. Anyway, that's about all that's involved in the sand out part of this. Again, I'm not going to do a whole lot. I just want to give people an idea of how much sanding should be involved and how much buffing should be involved. Now, if I get the Gorhams, again, the only thing I'll put on the plane from this point on, no white compound, no red compound, Gorham silver polish. And if you get an idea, on the previous tape, I did the flaps and the elevators, and hopefully, you know, to pass on kind of the information that, you know, this really shouldn't be all that time consuming. Especially if you're dealing with foam. Now, if this was a built-up tail, it might take a little more. And we will spend a lot of time on the wing, just to get the wing, all the bays real nice. But, you know, on a foam surface, if you build a foam wing plane, it should be a piece of cake. By the way, we just got our foam wing and tail from Scotty, so it looks like we will be able, at least within the next couple of videos, to start our, at least make kit parts, or hopefully, maybe even get the whole plane done, so we'll have 2 planes for this upcoming season. But the second plane obviously will be a foam plane. We won't have the time to do another built-up one. Just get some idea of what we've accomplished and how long it's taken to accomplish it. If you have an idea in your mind, then you can, obviously you can see your hand in it now. It gets real pretty and real friendly and nice to work with. You know, it's a lot more pleasant anyway when you get to this point in time. Now, when I get over to the other side, you can see the difference in the texture. This is really like kind of rough. Let's see if, and again, this is, a lot of times I found out guys that come over here, and it's the first time they've ever buffed a plane. One of the things they don't know is exactly what to do. They look at a surface like this and they want to just go out and buff it right away. Well, you know, the truth is you can buff. You could go right over this right now with Gorhams, but the problem is it would take 5 times the amount of time to do that. The 1200 paper really is the ticket here, and if you go with the 1200 paper and the Gorhams and paper towels, each time you do a surface now, throw this paper towel away. Once this gets corky and chalky, you can't really do an efficient job. I don't even want to with it. Well, now just so you get the idea just about, you know, we got the 2 sides of the stab done now. And remember, there's less paint on here now, so the top won't be this dry. I tried to blend this into the fillet here, tried to get this real nice around here. And I'm going to do the back of the hinge line real carefully. I'll wait on that a little while later. Again, over here, I want to get in here and buff that out. This will be the last chance until I, you know, put the Ray Brother linkage and all that stuff on there. But again, the whole philosophy here is to start at the back and the bottom, work your way to the front, or start on the top. In either case, start on the part of the plane that has the least amount of paint and work toward the part that has the most paint. Now these are just all these little delicate areas that you really, you just have to fool with. Anyway, just heard from Balsa Man. He's back from vacation. Back to see if he can turn the cellar into wood chips again. Good to have him back. He's a good man. I don't care what Midgley says about him. Anyway, these areas have very little paint on them, and I want to really avoid the corners, most of all. Not get carried away and get rub-throughs on the corners. Now, no matter how careful you are, if you're going to do a finish this thin, you're going to have some spots where you buff through. I don't care how good you are. So when we're all finished, we're going to get out that real thin touch-up brush. And again, at the gnats, the night before appearance judging, you can go by and touch up any of the little spots. Certainly not against the rules, that's for sure. That's what all these little details, and believe me, I am a detail-oriented person when it comes to this. All the little corners and angles, if you go carefully, and the beautiful part is if you waited till the end to do all this, or if you built the plane in one piece, it would be almost impossible to get in some of these corners and angles, all these little nooks and crannies. Now I know somebody, and I won't mention any names because they're a member of the Circle Burner Club, who had a plane just like I'm doing right now on a finishing friend. And I won't say what happened, but it was a disaster. You want to be real careful, and I really, at this point in time, I really prefer having a plane. If you don't have one of these foam covers that Jeff Stifel invented, maybe the answer is a bunch of pillows, blankets, or, you know, something like that. But be real careful if you decide to use a finishing friend. If used properly, it's fine, but you really can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Again, there's spots on here, and basically the further back in the plane you go, the less paint I try to put on, especially on the bottom. So there's some spots here where I've really gotten it down to being thin. And of course, needless to say, without even saying it, I assume, once you see any colored paint coming through, you know you've gone through in a spot right now because you want to keep the finish thin and light. That's about the end of it. And you really have to, what happens if you don't want to live with a couple of buff-through spots and touch them up just before you go to appearance judging, what always happens is you wind up with that 10, 12, 15 ounce finish. The plane is beautiful. You get out there, and anybody that's ever built a lead sled knows what I'm talking about, and I've built my share. You know the disappointment that comes with it. Again, I'm taking one piece at a time. Now, a big mistake I've seen, a guy takes a can of rubbing compound, or I'm going to do the whole wing at one shot. No. You got to pick a spot, say the size of a playing card or a stabbed surface. Do the next little unit, the rudder. I'd say a piece the size of a playing card is the most you can do in one shot. Get it right, move on to the next step. Let them overlap a quarter of an inch or so, and when you're all done, rub the whole thing in. That'll save you a lot of time. Again, I'm taking one little area at a time, detailing it out, getting it as close as I can to being perfect. As soon as I see I've gone through in any spot, that for sure then is the end of that little playing card size area. Again, it's so easy at this point in time. It's so easy to want to go put on another coat of clear. Boy, I know that feeling. And I've done it. I know because I've done it. And somewhere this time of year, it's freezing cold outside. It always seems like, it won't matter, the plane will be okay. And here comes the first day of spring. You get out to the field, and you know, you wish the plane was a couple ounces lighter, and you say, it would have been prettier, and we don't really need it. And boy, you really can kick yourself right in the tushkus anyway. Anyway, if you do one little spot at a time like I'm doing right now, it doesn't get too boring. Never do anything bigger than, like I said before, that playing card thing is a good way. That's one of my best suggestions you can get. Don't try to do a whole wing panel. Do one bay at a time, a third of the leading edge at a time. Break the plane down like a jigsaw puzzle into little spots and get each spot perfect. Once you get each spot perfect, when you're all done, there's a good chance the plane will be perfect, or it'll be as close to perfect as you can get it. Again, I don't know how many hours an average person can do this. I'm good for about 4 hours of buffing in one day, and then I have to go do something else. And I don't like to do it to the point of wearing your arm out like a rubber band. You know, so I'm going to try to target like 4 hours today. If I can, break it up with some breaks, doing something else. Usually the phone will ring or something else will give me a break, and if that happens, you know, it's to my advantage. Now, once I do each little spot, as soon as I see a spot here that I need to touch up, I'm just going to get the little paint jar out and give it that little touch up. Oh, I see another spot here. I didn't even realize. I thought that was the light shining. A little spot on the bottom here I can get the touch-up paint. And if you go for that decoupage finish, first day of spring, believe me, you'll usually regret it. Now another thing, what I'm trying to do is I've buffed this surface and I've buffed this. Now what I'm trying to do is get the towel, see if I can show this, get the towel to form a corner so I can get right down into the fillet in one shot. And I can see by the way the buffing compound is leaving a trail that I'm getting into the corner. And one of the high points of this airplane is the fillets are, at least at this point in time, they're in decent shape. You never know though until you take a plane out in the sun. You get that first sunny day out at Flushing, and if the fillets aren't good, bingo. Time for the old shop repair video. Okay, now that I've got one little segment of the plane done, I'm finished right to the front of the stab here. What I want to do, I want to get all the little touch-ups done before I flip it over, because as I'm working up in this area, this touch-up stuff can be drying. Now what happens if you give this touch-up paint 5 minutes to dry, 10 minutes to dry, you come back, just touch it with compound, and that's really the end of your repair. You really can't do a whole lot more than that. But believe me, living with these little touch-up spots, boy, relative to flying a lead sled, no contest. This always allows you to run less of a nose weight. You always get a harder corner, at least in my book you do. Okay, that looks like we've got most of them. And just one more here. Let that sit, and we'll work now from where we stop buffing here to maybe the flap hinge line. Now what I'll do, I'll pick up a rather large area. I'm picking up from here to the flap hinge, which is about double the normal amount of area. But at the bottom, you know, it's kind of a smooth, straight area. It's like doing a stab surface, so it should go relatively fast. Keep plenty of that M600 on, and you see, as you move forward in a plane, you have more and more paint on the plane. Once we get to the top, this will be a piece of cake. You won't go through anywhere. Now that I've said that, for sure we'll go through on the top somewhere, but when you have that extra, you know, a couple layers of paint, usually it makes for a very, very easy buff out job. Now you can see the back area where we've buffed it. Now watch, as soon as it comes up onto the unbuffed area. And by constantly doing this, candling the light, you're letting the light bounce off it. This is where you pick up any spot you might have missed. Now as I've gone through this, right away I see some yellow paint coming off. I have to stop. Even though I might want to buff that a little more, leave it. Otherwise we're going to start burying it in clear. It's a place that's very far back in a plane. It means we need 1.8 times the amount of weight up in the nose. We're going to wind up with all kind of nose weight. Just leave it. Now we're going to start piece by piece sectioning off the bottom of the body. Probably I'll go halfway up and then the front half again the same way. Again, if you just get used to that idea of sectioning it off and finish one section, like putting pieces in a puzzle, that's a good, real good way to do it. You don't get as bored that way either, it seems. Now again, I'm going to pick this up about in the middle. And if I can get right down into the fillets this way with the tip of my fingers too. That would be nice. Even near my plane. Look at this guy. He just comes back with a $160 spinner. Oh my God, look at this. Hold it up to your face so we can see how big it is. Holy Christ.
I bet you don't know which one's uglier either.
Yeah. Or more expensive to feed. That's the spinner for Big Tsunami anyway. While we were off camera, I got up to the front on here and I got in these scoops very carefully. Now the next thing I'm going to do is sand in these little duct areas. I want to get everything I can do from being in the upside down position except for the wing, and then flip it over, start at the rudder, and work my way forward again. I want to get in here, and again, I'm going to use that machinist ruler, be real careful, get in there. Try not to go through, but if I do, just hit it with the touch-up. Now one thing works real well if you feel like trying it here. I took a piece of soft 1/8 inch balsa and just loaded it up with gorms to get in this scoop. Cut it the size of the scoop, the exhaust outlet of course, and even the bottom here, you can see I can get down at the bottom and I can do both sides. So for this kind of an air outlet or a scoop for a cow, this might be a good trick, might be something worthwhile. Just put the compound back in there. The wood itself makes for a nice buffing surface. Now of course I'll finish it up with a paper towel. Yeah, that wood stick trick works real good if anybody, can improvise. You probably could, I don't know, wrap some piece of paper towel or piece of regular towel around it if you wanted to. I'm trying not to go through on the edges here.
You want to tack this as
I like also to get these little edges buffed down at this time too, and try not to go on a corner, just buff the flats. I got all the areas inside those scoops at least to the point where we can at least have some kind of buffing in there. It won't look like 90 grit sandpaper. Okay, we're ready to flip it over and do the top side. And if you have a big joint... Yeah. Alright, I got one side of the tail. Now I'm going to, again, I'll start here, do the other side of the stab, the rudder, and then segment out the body and plane car and work my way right up to the front. So I will at one point in time have the whole empennage, which is the tail, done, and the whole top of the body, in fact the whole body, before I ever start the wing. The reason for that is the wing has more dope on it, and if you go back through the tapes you'll see I put the dope on later, so that'll maybe give me an extra day or so, and I'm hoping today I will get the whole body, finished up.
what have we got? Old table.
Ball summit.
Oh, and then
Good, I got the whole side of the tail, both sides, top and bottom done now. Again, I'll start on the rudder, both sides, and then segment my way right out.
what a pair of, come on, you know that?
How you making out here? This is looking good. Boy, it's nice building a plane this big. You can just use a chainsaw or something. At least you're not getting any dust on your face. That's good. Balsa man strikes again. Now this is one good way of doing both of the body sides at once if you can possibly, figure it out. This is a decent way. Anyway, I just wanted to mention this on the video too, boy. I don't know why I forgot to mention this sooner. You never want to use any wax. At least 6 weeks, 8 weeks before you put any wax even near a dope finish. The wax seals it in. Even though right now it would look real nice if I'd throw a coat of Pledge or something on here or some other kind of carnauba, but no wax. 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Now I've got everything done up to the cockpit. I'm going to segment out that cockpit piece next up to about the high point of the wing. And then the whole nose section. And we can, that'll probably be the end of the buffing today. We're in rubber arm mode here. Rubber tsunami mode anyway. Peggy, you should have never copied over that soap opera, boy. I know that paybacks are a bitch, but had to get you on that one. You want to be real careful on the canopy not to press down too hard, squashing that down. Now I'm trying to get into the fillets with the little pointed block, same as we did on the bottom. It's a good feeling to be sanding the fillets and not be worrying about goddamn bubbles all over the place. Now you also want to do the same thing up around the canopy. Get that edge cut in real nice. Now one of the things you can always do here, you get to an area like this where you have to hold one side, is just use socks. This way you can buff both sides at the same time. You can be getting down into the fillet area all in one shot. This is a nice time saver, and then of course finish it off with paper towels. Get that nice smooth final, whatever you want to call it, final buff out. This is just one of the areas where socks just seem to be a good choice. Now we're closing in on having this fuselage buffed out. It was one day to do the fuselage in the roughly 4 hours. And we're going to go have some lunch here, and then we're going to come back and do some work on the big sanam. Big salami, big sanami. Now whenever you use a sock, you always want to finish it up, and we're just about at the end of this. this little session of buffing. And I always feel like 4 hours is my maximum, and after that it's kind of a downhill thing. So I'll try to finish this, just get this done with the paper towel. And we have our class tonight. We should have some new people coming over. So I want to go get some lunch, hang out for a little while. It's a real good feeling though to know that I've gotten this much done, and we can start working on the wing panels tomorrow. Well, tomorrow we're going to do that thing over at the other house, so it'll be 2 days. We got to get some squirrels out of the other house. Get some squirrels moved into my 2-family house, and they don't pay rent. In fact, I got tenants that don't pay rent. Peggy, help me, help me, help me. Okay. We'll pick this up later. That's about all we're going to do today. You see how nice, of course the top block always buffs out nice, the canopy buffed out beautifully. And I'll tell you, it's real nice to have a good pair of socks that you can work with when you do this.
Can I have my socks back?
No! Got it? Just one of the tools, one of the great tools. Huh? Hey, James, baby! It's finishing friend time again. A finishing friend, yeah. The human finishing friend. Okay, Monday night at Wendy's. Jimmy's here. Let's get a look at what he's in. Give me a little dissertation on this. You got the letters. These are the vinyl letters.
Vinyl letters from your everyday sign shop, or in this case somebody was cutting them at the Ram show.
Okay.
And I've always put them on dry before. This guy says the hot tip is you get some soapy water underneath them. I'm having a little bit of trouble with that, but maybe I'm just not squeegeeing it out enough. I don't know.
Okay.
It's
oh, okay. The soapy water is so that you can move it around.
just to make sure you don't get any bubbles and
yeah.
But I'm having more trouble pulling the backing off because of the soap underneath it. I mean,
it isn't sticking underneath. Yeah.
See, I put this stuff on dry before, and you don't have this problem.
Yeah.
You just got to put it on right the first time.
Exactly. You can't miss. It's like doing a foam wing.
So we're gonna.
This looks interesting.
Gonna have to putsy this thing out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'll be interested in this myself. I just.
Well, the Vector had the same sort of letters,
I know.
but I just threw them on dry. I never.
I've seen them go on dry, and they look like they go on. But if you the bitches, if you get them on crooked, they're on crooked forever.
Forever, yeah.
You can't pick them up. Now the soapy water lets you manipulate it a little bit. Okay, I understand that.
They don't stick down at all.
Yeah. Yeah, Car.
Could you bring the soup back down for me?
Sure, I'll bring it down right now. Hold on, gotta go
Soup's
put
falling.
the soup. The soup is falling
The
down.
soup's on.
Soup's on. Let's see the soup. Come on, Debbie Barrett. Debbie, look at this soup. Look. Look, they feed me like I'm in a Polish concentration camp. Jeez.
You are. Haven't you
I
figured
am,
that out
yeah.
yet?
Soup. Okay, how you doing with the lettering? Any better?
That's gonna be all right, but it's.
Well, these are the kind of things you want to have on video. If the shit doesn't work, then tell people, and if it works, great.
Well, I'll try the other one on dry and see if I eat my words. That's all. The next one will be a dry job.
Never believe what you read in print, boy. That's for sure. That's the bottom line.
The guy that told me this swore up and down.
Bottom of the 8 and the bottom of the 4.
Don't even try to do it dry, he says. Never do it dry.
Yeah. How many things do you read in a magazine and they don't work out?
Well, the thing is, the bubbles do come out, though. Sometimes when you put it on dry, you get bubbles that are always there. This way, the bubbles are squeegeeing out.
Well, there's theory and there's practice.
Yeah,
and we all know the theory doesn't work.
These aren't that thick, though. These are a lot thinner than the ones the guy cut me for the Vector.
Yeah.
These, I'm pretty sure, would bury under clear on a real airplane. There's not much there.
That's twice as thick as paint is, though.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, those who do and those who
But
know.
for a profile airplane where there's no appearance points, for $12, this was a good buy.
Yeah, by the way, well, give the guy that made the kit a little plug. Where'd you get the kit from?
Oh, this is a Ken Smith kit of the Gordon Delaney Pathfinder. It was in Flying Models a couple of months ago, too.
Okay.
But the kit's damn close. I mean, it came out the way he said it would with the wood. The wood is selected pretty decent.
Halfway decent wood in it, yeah.
Yeah, there's some fairly stiff stuff I was worried about, but it's cut for places where you needed it stiff. The only thing I would have went a little stronger on the fuselage. This ended up being a little, but typical profile.
Speaking of kits, very soon there'll be a foam wing cardinal kit. Foam wing cardinal kit. Yay! Borelli, listen up.
Tomorrow and find this thing 6 foot and weighing 30 pounds.
Yeah.
I
No.
wouldn't want it to grow.
Well, sooner or later we're going to find out if these letters stick better with soapy water or just press them on. All right.
I'll get some bubbles come back.
As soon as Brian gets here, he can do another sanding on his body, get another coat of filler on. Just waiting for the rest of the crowd to get here. It's Monday night. It's pizza night.
Crash test dummies on skis, huh? Okay.
Yeah, the crash test dummies on skis. Anyway, it looks like he put this side on dry, this side wet. I guess this side is okay. I don't know what we're complaining about here.
It came out okay. It took a whole 10 minutes longer, that's
Yeah,
all.
you got one little bubble in.
The question is it going to stay down since it's got soap interfering with the
Did you
glue?
try picking one up?
No.
I don't want to pull it up.
Go ahead,
But
try.
this one, the dry side is definitely down for the count here, no doubt about that.
That don't sound good.
Ooh.
Oh, that's
Uh-oh,
why
I don't
it's not
like
really
that.
down. It's not really down yet. Let's get it all down.
It seems like the trick is always start at the middle of the letter and work like a sunburst to the outside. More free hints and tips from the Strega lettering service. Oh, this is the part I hate.
Along with the...
Yeah, if you go real careful, I guess, and just don't pull up the edges. Boy, would I love to be doing this over a painted surface and seeing the paint come up, and there's the silt span and the cap strips, and telephone time. President Nixon calling. Let me get the phone.
You bet.
This is especially good
What do you want me to do?
What was that?
See, we gotta keep that Burke circle good up for you, you know?
How do you like this plaque from the Middlesex modelist saying I have the most gorgeous wife in the world? Look. All right, get a close-up of this, Jimmy. Get close so you could read that. Says Wendy Artnowski, one of the most macho men in the world, from the Middlesex modelers. That's fantastic. I love it.
Oh, that's really nice.
Not bad. Not beautiful cut.
I'm leaving.
Oh, you going to class? Okay. All right, we're gonna get the girls in.
Years. Gotta be.
Well, you can do one tonight here. That's what we got.
Well, you know what? I got caught up in the cloth dilemma.
The amount of movement.
Silk, and then later on that coverall.
No, forget about that.
Heavy. What? You see
You
what-
doing all right, Brian? You don't look so fast tonight. You look like you're in slow. Maybe you need pizza. That's what it is. What do you think, guys? Does he need pizza? Look at
like
this.
adrenaline, Wendy.
Look at this guy. Hey, is it true there really is a mafia, or is that bullshit? Tell me the truth, Pete. Pete don't want to hear about this stuff. Anyway, how did this work out? What's the final analysis? Water, no water? No water.
It's working out about the same, but believe it or not, there's more bubbles coming back in the water than there is in the dry, because it
Oh,
seems
boy.
it's sucked back up. The other thing I noticed is it's hard to pick an edge up on either, but the wet one picks up.
Yeah,
Let me give it
noticed
a day. Maybe it's really got to
Put it out in the sun for one day. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, come on. Let's hear about it. Tell us about Italy again. Big story. We were down in Middlesex, and this guy, we were dying of the heat, and he went out and brought us some roast beef sandwiches.
Is that your number?
Oh, man, what a guy.
All right. This is yours.
You want to get the phone there, Carlos? We want to get this Dennis Toth fresh in from the King Orange. Give me a full report, Dennis. How are those foxes doing down in Florida, Dennis?
Middle table, right under the
Kicking ass, huh? All right, let's see this. Hey.
This was made by my wife Claire, though. This was,
Yeah, okay. Custom shirt.
After I dorked the Stuka at our meet and put it back together. She made this for Christmas.
What happens if she dorks you and puts you back together? Now, let's have the truth be known. Dennis came here for the last time he paid for the pie, so he's entitled to one slice. He's on his fourth slice already. Slugging out the piece. Look at this. We don't have enough pies here to go around. Carlos is getting back on the tomb to pipe. The sanding slave is sanding away. Keep these guys busy there. Unbelievable. It's a good session here. Good. Now you're at the end of a really good session here Monday night. Got the first coat of silver on Brian's body here. He was sanding away all night. Looks like that's going to need one more coat of silver. Old big Tsunami's back there with another 100 hours of carving and sanding. Boy, those big belt sanders and everything are really beautiful. Anyway, we're sitting here. Put Strega here to sleep. We're going to try to work on a wing tomorrow. But anyway, I wanted to show this, and this is really... Didn't get to show this before. This is Joe Adamusco's new plane. Let's see if we can get this without having a light reflecting on it. Check this picture out. Joe Adamusco's new plane. See if we can get the thing focused in here a little bit. Awesome, and of course a week or so from now we'll be seeing Joe at the stunt forum, and he's planning on spending at least one day here in the shop. Should have a good time with him. Awesome. Mr. Awesome, excuse me. Nice plane, beautiful. Well, we're back down in the shop. George was working here this morning, but he had to leave. He's got the fin on Tsunami. You see the belt sanding we did on this yesterday. By the way, that worked really well, and I'm wondering if we can do a top block that way. Anyway, I got out old Strega here. I want to basically only going to have an hour or so to work on this today, but again, I want to break this up into segments. What I'm going to try to do is do each bay separately, try to maybe finish out the bays, and then work my way around the perimeter. Now, breaking up a wing section like that seems like a very reasonable way to do it. There was a time when I used to go crazy and just try to buff the whole wing at one time. Out of the question. If you break it up the same way the body has been broken up, and the bays just happen to be a convenient way of doing it, it seems like it's a lot easier and more palatable to do it that way. So that's what we're going to start working on today, and we'll see how much we get finished. Now I'm trying to get this on the macro and so you can feel you can see what is the unsanded part. Here's the first bay, and boy, you just really, the parts that I've got sanded, I'm about up to the 6 here. You absolutely can't feel where the letters are. If they give an extra row for that, great. I'll be in a 21 point row. Anyway, that is about as good as you can get. Now let's see if we can candle down here, and you can see the difference in the. These are sanded out to about here. You can see it's a little rougher out there. You'd feel it. Even if you can't see it, you can feel it. I'm doing most of this by feel. And it helps because it's relatively boring. It helps if you can get some interesting stuff on TV, or, you know, get your wife to do a strip tease for you or something. Better yet, get your girlfriend to do a strip tease. Anyway, that's about what, I'm just going to do the rest of this on the animation and go right off. All the bays done, and then work my way around the perimeter and then start buffing it out. Kind of redundant here, just over and over and over. got that whole wing panel sanded out there. All the edges are done. What I'm going to do now is just reverse the thing, start at one end with the gorums, do one bay at a time, and then work my way around the perimeter. Maybe I'll even get this whole panel done tonight. Let's see. Now you can see I got the first two of these buffed. You can see how dull. Let's see if we can get this on the macro lens. I don't know if we can. You can see how much the light reflects. It reflects the most. What's happening with a built-up, any built-up wing, even an I-beamer, you're picking up the light like from a diamond, from a lot of facets. There's no point in time when it isn't shining back at you. When you buff a flat wood surface, it gives you one shine on the way through. This is always something sparkling and shining. This is the part of the beauty of having a built-up wing. So I'm just going to go right across, one panel at a time, maybe 5-10 minutes on each panel. And again, that whole thing of segment out the plane into little pieces, it works beautifully. Now I'm just trying to get each bay done individually as I go on to the next one. Now you can see I've finished off the bays, and I'm going to start doing around the perimeter here. What I did when I finished up the bays, I went right out, right up into the flap fillet here, try to get that last spot. So now I'm working in this direction around the whole perimeter. At this point in time, you really get some satisfaction out of seeing the light bounce off all these facets and curves and everything. It really is a nice thing. You really start to feel like, hey, you know, all this work is worth it. Kind of a Joe Adamusco thing. Now I'm just taking like 3 or 4 rib bays at a time. If you do more than that, it just seems like it just gets out of control too easy. 3 or 4 rib bays, leading edge. All the hardwood, you know, the places where you're going over balsa wood, obviously it buffs up a whole lot faster than the open bays, but again, this is just a good time for patience. I'll probably just get this wing panel done tonight, and we'll pick up another panel tomorrow. Probably, realistically, 1 wing panel a night is all you're going to do, unless you, you know, somehow can take a couple days off work and do it all at once. But you run into that thing where your arm gets tired, and we've been at this about 3 hours now. Now the main thing on doing the trailing edge is not to break through this corner. This corner is where you always seem to have a problem breaking through. Now believe it or not, I got this whole panel buffed and I only have 2 or 3 little spots to touch up. Of course, one of them has to be right in the middle of the checkerboard. Unbelievable. So what I'll do is I'll get some thin paint and just get a little touch up on that. Touch up this panel, and that's probably going to finish this for tonight. It's time to go play Family Man. Balsa Man and Family Man here. Anyway, it's been a good little session, and I've just about gotten my 4 hours in. Taking all the buffing I can stand. And that panel really did come out relatively nice. I'm going to look at this from a lot of different. You can see the difference in the buffed side. Look at this side, isn't buffed? What a difference. Amazing. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. I don't care what anybody says. That is the thing that separates the macho men from the bonzo boys. Something like that anyway, Midgley. Pay attention. Now this morning I want to pick up by doing the other bottom panel. Again, I talked to Joe Adamusco last night. One of the things we agreed on, and he had mentioned to me, and I thought this is a good thing to put on a video, he had spent roughly 20 hours buffing out his new plane, the ship he calls Mr. Awesome. 20 hours, I don't know. I think I have more than 20 hours in this. I must be slower than Joe, but I think that's not it at all. I think Joe is just more of a craftsman than I am, maybe, as far as getting the detail stuff done. I haven't spent a lot of time on the bottom here. I've got kind of the quick job done on the bottom, and I will finish the bottom of that panel later. But when we get to the top, we probably try to take a little extra time as far as getting around the corners and edges and things that normally I kind of gloss over on the bottom. And I guess the point here is, I know I have less paint on the bottom, so I'm trying to take off as little as possible. When I get to the top, I know I have all that extra clear, and I can really put that, the finish from hell on, or the finish from Debbie Borelli, I don't know. Anyway, just if you have that in mind and you know that that's part of what's happening, you'll probably be able to stay within that 7 or maybe even 8 ounce finish limit, and you'll probably benefit by having a much better flying plane. Now I'm being real careful not to go through on the edges here, because what happens when you buff the top, you also do the same edge. So I'm just giving it the minimum. And over these spots, remember we repaired these spots? Right now they're, well, relatively invisible anyway. I want to be real careful on these leading and trailing edges though. That's really a spot you can go through. And where the silk span joins the the sheeting, that's another vulnerable spot. In fact, I did go through here a little bit already. I'll touch that up. Now, any little spots I still have, I can touch up here, and then I'll let it dry a few minutes before I flip it over and do the other side. Again, this is one of those areas I want to be real careful of. This edge up here is really an area you can buff right. I'm trying to pinch it between my fingers, but not catch the edge. Just catch the top and bottom surface. Seems like that's a reasonable way to get the final little polish on it. Now, of course, right on the edge is right where the silk span joins the wing. I have a couple little touch-up spots. Again, the reason for this, if we put the same amount of clear on the bottom as the top, we probably would have added some unnecessary weight to the plane. And I really don't think a lot of people are going to be seeing these little spots. But I know they're going to be seeing the difference in the flying with the little bit less weight. And of course the top, I hope will be perfect. Ha ha ha. Yeah, sure. Anyway, we got a little spot in the yellow over there. So I'll leave the jaws right out now because I'm going to be using them. And the little spots that you've buffed through, you know, what it's telling you in a way is that you really have that minimum amount of paint that you'd like to have on a plane. And boy, there is nothing more frustrating than after a plane is all finished, trying to go back and get 4 or 5 ounces of paint off it. Ask anybody, ask Bob Lampione, I know he'd admit it right up front. It's better just not to put the paint on and live with these little spots. You almost, if nobody tells you these spots are here, believe me, you don't even see them. The planes that won the Concourse Award for me had plenty of little spots and nobody ever saw them, especially on the bottom. But boy, they see that little bit of extra weight, especially when it's behind the center of gravity. And it's real important where the stripes go around a corner. It always seems like that's exactly where you buff through, right along the edges and the corners. Now, just another watershed, and I keep talking about watersheds, is having a whole bottom of the plane buffed out. Now, really what we have left is the two upper panels. And those are the two panels I want to make sure they're as perfect as I possibly can make them. So, whatever amount of time I spent on the bottom, and I was very careful because I know I don't have the full amount of clear on the bottom, I've got a little less. I want to spend probably twice the amount of time on the top, and I want to really go for a super detailed job. You can see how this buffed up. If you really never get to see this plane in real life, believe me, this is a beauty. This is one of the nicer ones. And the bad ones aren't so bad either. Anyway, this really does look nice. And what I'm really happy about at this point in time is I was able to get, at least this far, get the gold leaf lettering on pretty much in the way I wanted to. And I really do, when I had this out in the sun the other day, I was just looking at it to see how I like the colors in the sun. It really does have what I think is a very nice classic look out in the sun. It doesn't have that Toys R Us look. I haven't had to resort to, you know, some kind of crazy thing like Midgley fluorescent paint, you know. I haven't had to resort to that, and yet it still really seems to stand out in the sun. So, kind of happy with it. I'm going to take a nice break, go up and have a cup of coffee, come back and flip it over and start on the top. Now what I want to do, I want to start on the inner panel. There's a reason, and try to follow through what I'm trying to do, because we're trying to work within a time frame here. There's just a little bit less clear on this panel, and obviously the thickest paint on the whole airplane is probably from the three last ribs out to the tip, because that's going to be tip weight anyway. So that paint out there I'd like to do dead last. I'd like to do the outer panel last. Follow the reasoning for this. I've started on the plane where the paint is the thinnest, on the bottom and in the back, worked my way to the front. And by doing that, I've used up the time window, the time that this paint takes to dry. And every day that goes by now, this paint gets easier and easier to buff out. It's something, if you don't experience it yourself, if you try to sand it in 1 or 2 days and you come back a week later and sand it and it just drops right off, well, you don't know, if you're not ready to understand why that's happening. What's happening is the paint itself is getting harder and harder and harder. As it gets harder, it powders off. It cuts with the M600 a lot quicker and easier. So ultimately, you save yourself quite a bit of time by waiting, just by being patient. But anyway, you can see how this finish is the same, the spray finish that we had. And I'm just going to start hitting. By the way, there's some spot on here. I got to find where it is. Oh, it's on the other panel. Up on the leading edge where the gun spit yuck right out. Oh, we've already done that on the tail. But anyway, you just can block sand. I don't know where the hell that is. I remember feeling it before. Right up around here. Somewhere anyway on the leading edge there's a big spit out where the gun spit. Again, you don't want to sand that right away. Leave that for last if you can. It'll block sand right out and you probably have no problem at all just making it go away. Now I usually can tell right away, just by going over the cap strips, I can feel that this has an awful lot more paint than the bottom, so I can really bear down a little bit harder, be a little more careless. But again, I really do want to, this is going to be a time-consuming thing, and I really don't want to rush through it. I just want to take my time as much as I can. This is the part of the plane I think most people see most of the time, is the upper surface of the wing, and you'd like to have that as pretty as possible. At least I would like to have it as pretty as possible anyway. Now, it's worth mentioning, with all this extra clear on the top of the plane, this is just sanding out so easily and neatly, not going through in any spots, and because it's kind of hard right now, it's just cutting right through. It's really, this is going in half the time it took to do the bottom, because I haven't had to be really this careful. So it's really an asset having this extra clear. And then of course, you know, This is just my way of doing things. I don't like carrying around all that extra material. Just picture going through the square 8 at the Nats or somewhere, and all that clear that nobody's ever going to see is just going along for the ride. What we're doing on Tsunami here, George cut out 2 halves of what's going to be the canopy. They're both 1.5-inch blocks, and of course we're going to take them over on good old Tsunami there and do the carving. Let this dry up. While we're doing that, I'm just basically working away on the top surface here, trying to get as much buffing and sanding done as I can in between, you know, on and off with Tsunami. We got 2 projects going at once. Now what's nice, George has the old belt sander going here, but notice where the dust is going. We got the vacuum bench working, the dust goes right into the bench. No mess at all. The thing is really coming in handy. This vacuuming bench is probably the best investment I ever made here. It really works nice. By the way, for whatever, I've been working on this while he's on. By the way, for whatever it's worth, got to show you something else here. I'm sure you'll find this interesting. Model Aviation just sent me the letter today that they've accepted the idea that I can write an article about that dust removal bench. So, knowing Model Aviation, they aren't the fastest outfit in the world, but I'm hoping I can finish up the article this week and maybe we'll see it in Model Aviation. It's a good thing. Okay, I got the outer panel all buffed out. It's time to start the last of the panels. Boy, I can't wait to finish this up. Hey, here's a nice tip you want to ever make up a wood canopy. George is doing it with a strip of that sticky back sandpaper. But he's got the back end glued to the table. Now we'll just break it off like when we put a wing in a body. Reverse it, glue the other side here, and you get a perfect sanding action. Plus you, yeah, that turned out pretty decent. I gotta admit, you know your stuff. Okay, we have finally got the shop cleaned up, and boy, this really buffed up nice. This buffed up better than I expected it would. This was a long day. That's the problem now, is I'm dead. George has his stuff put away. You can see Big Tsunami's starting to really shape up. I'm going to put this away for a day, take a little bit of a break. All the buffing, at least the preliminary buffing, is done, and it really does look a little bit happy. I'm happy with it. That's a good way to put it. Anyway, what I wanted to do is lay out a little set of things that I still want to do here in some sequence, some logical sequence. I want to make the gear up and the hinges and all whatnot, and obviously we'll try to get a start on that tomorrow. But this really was a good day. It's really a pleasant thing when you have a day you get so much done. And it's another watershed. We're sneaking up. There's not many watersheds left, and boy, I hope the day is going to be real soon and we're going to be able to get out there and get some flying. Really getting itchy to fly this guy. Now, with all the buffing done, hopefully all the buffing done, maybe except for a few small touch-ups, what I did, I went over my list of things that still have to be done. The reason being is I'm trying to make up a priority list. In other words, if I work on the hinges, there'll be time while the hinges are drying that I can be doing something else. I want to put some Imron on the cowling, but it's not a day I can spray outside, so I just go down the list and see what's the most appropriate thing to do. I have to make up the gear legs yet. Maybe we'll get to do that later today. I don't have the motor and tank from Jim yet, so that's kind of a hang-up. Things like the tail wheel, the tip weight, all the other little things. The tank vents still have to go in, and the Rabe rudder linkage. And it's not a day I can go outside and make up a set of lines and handles. So by having a list, and this is a key thing for me anyway, I like to get my time in order. The key thing here is now I can go through the list and say, okay, today I have an hour to 2 hours, whatever. What's an appropriate thing? Bang, check that off the list. And when all the things on the list are done, the plane will be ready to fly. So without the list, sometimes you come down the shop and you look around, and you don't know what you want to do next. It's kind of a lost cause. So with that in mind, I want to hopefully, I'm going to look at the list again. I thought I was going to, put the tank vents in today, but I don't have the tank. Maybe I'll work on the hinges, and I can get the epoxy drying on the hinges. Now, what I did, I got the RIT dye out, and this is the normal thing we use to dye canopies. I want to dye all the hinges black. But before I dye them, a couple of things that are important to do, and these are mistakes I've made before. You don't want to leave the hinges in the dye any longer than really necessary. So what I'm doing, I'm making up a couple extra hinges, because you'll always get one that'll have a little bit of rust or something on it. So I made up a couple extra ones. I want to make sure I have enough to do the whole job. And I'm going to do some work on the hinges. In fact, I don't know if we've done this on camera yet. I've trimmed off the back part. These are IM hinges, right even with the little holes. I'm going to take out the Dremel tool and put some slits in here to try to roughen it up. Same thing with the rudder hinges too. But what I'm going to try to do is get these all dyed black today. I'm also going to go get out the linkage for the Rabe rudder. Anything that I want to dye black, because I'll make up one mix of black dye. Hopefully dye everything. I'll do all the work on the hinges before I actually dye them, and I'll do that on camera too. Try to get this. What happens if you go to put the hinges in like this, especially if they're trimmed, you really don't have a good glue surface. It's kind of a hit or miss operation getting the glue in there. Another thing too, I'm going to take each hinge and go back and forth a few times and see if I have any clickers. You know, some of these hinges, they have a click to them. It makes you crazy. After you install them in a plane, you can't seem to get the click out very easily. So I'll take each one and just make sure I have the clicking action out of them. I don't know why some of them, here's one that clicks. I don't know if you can hear that. So I'll take a brand new razor blade, get in there. It's a little, where the mold isn't making a perfect contact, it leaves a little flashing. But I want to work on these hinges ahead of time. I want these hinges to be, real good before I dye them, because the trick is to get them out of the dye, dry them off, and get some oil on that hinge pin or some chain lube or something, so that you don't get any rust in the hinge pin slots. And then of course I want to wipe them with alcohol and get them glued in place. And of course we'll try to do that. That's the next step here to do. So let me get all my nylon parts together. I have the dye, and we'll get this cranking along. Now this is the first year, and this is really Mike Rogers and Jim came up with this, that we're using the ball link Rabe rudder linkage. And of course the nylon part in there, I'm going to take one apart. The nylon part in there, I'd like to dye black. The idea being when it's black, it kind of doesn't jump out at you. So I'm going to take, and what I'll actually do here is I'll make an extra one. So I'll put that in with the nylon parts that I'm going to dye. You really need 2 of these packages to do it. In fact, what I'll do while I have them apart is I'll make 3 of them. Never hurts to have a spare one, that's for sure. I just never liked the look of the, I don't even know what you would call it, the giant white horn on the back. I always try to make the horn that I have. Now these extra parts I'll save. I always like to, in fact I'll take them all out of the pack right now. Doing this new Rabe rudder linkage, it looks like this is going to be an excellent way to do it, by the way, and I'll try to get this on camera too. But I'll save all the extra little hardware, put it all in one package, and then when it comes time that I need to do it, I'll have some extra little pieces here. Again, we're using that RIT dye, the same dye that used the canopy for. And the main thing, see, I have to do this when Karen's not home, because I use her good pot up on the stove. And if she knew I was using her good pot to dye hinges, boy, she goes crazy on me. She goes absolutely berserk. My good pot, my good pot. So what I try to do is I let her go off to work, run upstairs and dye all the hinges, clean the pot, and it does clean out relatively easily. It's not a really big problem. So now I have all the nylon parts. I even have a couple extras and a couple extra hinges. And the last thing I'll have to do is do the dremeling work on the hinges, get the dye ready, and go get, the main thing, go get Karen's pot, and we'll be ready to go. Alright, here's the hinge with the piece that I've trimmed off. Now, of course, one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to take the Dremel parting wheel, and I'm going to cut some washboard slits going side to side. The reason being, it gets a little better grip. You can see these are kind of a shiny surface. You get a much better grip on the hinges. And boy, the last thing you need is somewhere down the road in the life of the model have the hinges start loosening up and pulling out. I'm just making slits side to side, not trying to go all the way through, just to give that some texture. By cutting off this extra piece of hinge too, it also doesn't go into the foam and pop the foam up and make a bubble. Just takes nice light cuts. Now I'll take each one, I'll do one at a time. This also, now you have some loose grit on here. I can sand each one down just a little bit. And again, I like to do this before I do the dyeing operation. Now I also want to check each one as I do it for if we have any that are going to be clickers. This one looks okay, but there was one in here that was a clicker. Where the heck was it? Now here it is. When you see that, you got to hold it back all the way and you'll feel there's a ridge on there. And you can just sand off the ridge. Reverse it the other way, all the way. Nothing is more of a pain in the neck than when you put these together and the damn things, you go to move the controls and it's click, 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 click. Sounds like you have a frog in a control system. Okay, that's better too. And I'll just go right through these. Believe it or not, there's a lot of hinges on this plane. I'll get these all ready and then sneak upstairs and get out the pot and get them dyed. Get a little view on the macro lens here. Here's one that isn't done. Here's one that is done and has the barrel all sanded nice. Okay, I got all the, well, let's see if we get this on the macro lens. All the hinges. And these are not deep going into you know, half of the thickness of the material, just scratches on the surface. And notice I don't have anything around the actual hinge pins. I've scraped each one with a razor, gotten all the clicks out. These are ready to dye. So I'm going to get all my little, you know, here's the rest of my stuff, my RIT dye, all my little ends and whatever ball link ends here that we have, all this little stuff. Get everything into a pot, get the RIT dye and get it boiled up. That's the next step here. Now, rather than risk the wrath of God, I decided not to use our good pot. I found this old cookie dough pot, or whatever the hell this is. Just pour the dye right in. Now, don't make the mistake I made one time. I decided I'd save the dye. Well, I tried saving the dye in a jar, and it really didn't work well the second time. I think you have to buy new dye each time. Stir this up. Now the trick is, just like a canopy, is get it just before the point that it boils, but not boiling. Just before you start to see bubbles is just the right time. We have all our little parts here. And just play Susie Homemaker here for a while. Stir the parts up. My guess is this runs about 3 to 5 minutes. Just before you see the dye start to boil, kill the flame, let it sit in there for 15 minutes, and then rinse it out. I really do like the way the hinges look when they're dyed, by the way. I know a lot of people have come over to me and said, hey, where did you get the black hinges, or the black zip ties, or the black Rabe rudder linkage, or black anything. Well, yeah, well, you just make it, that's all. Alright, I'm just going to let that run. Okay, you can see right along the edges, you can see bubbles starting to form. We're right just below the boiling point, right about at the temperature you would want to make cappuccino at. Right about there, we'll just let it sit. Okay, another 30 seconds have gone by and there's bubbles all around the edge and just starting to form in the middle. A couple of bubbles are coming up now, and we'll just kill the flame here. Just let that sit in the dye a half an hour or so, and then we'll take it out and you can see this steam or whatever coming off it. Half hour from now we'll come back to this. Now after this all cools down, get ready to get your hands dirty unless you want to wear dishwashing gloves. Pour out all the dye. By the way, if you can't get it to dye dark enough, just leave it in a little longer. And as a last resort, put some salt in the water. A little salt in the water makes it come out even darker. Now what I do now is I get each one of these hinges, I'll just keep rinsing them, just like you would rinse out clothes that were dyed. And I'm going to clean each one with one of these little Dobie sponges. I don't know what you call these little guys. Scrub each one just a little bit. Make sure you get all the lumps of dye off, and the dye is now in the material. You're not going to scratch the surface here. Rinse each one and put it on a newspaper to dry. Now just remember, one of the other choices you have, and I've done it before, is to make the hinges match the plane. I've dyed them blue and red and green and whatever, but black is the easiest dye to use. When you're doing reds and blues, usually dyeing the hinges, you'd have to leave it in the dye for an hour or so. This was in the dye, 10-15 minutes. Let it cool down on its own, and that's usually enough. Within an hour you have the hinges. Hey, just another quick tip here. Don't do what I did over at the condo one day. I was rinsing off the hinges, and I didn't have the little drain plug in the sink, and about 1/3 of the hinges went down the sink, which was really convenient as can be. I had to go mix another batch of dye in it, and whatnot. So just a good little tip while you're engrossed in figuring this out. Now as I cleaned each hinge, I laid it out. I'll press it between some newspaper. This will blot out most of the water. If you can't get it out this way, another good way is to get the compressor out. But you want to for sure, don't let the hinges stay wet any longer than you have to, because the pin will start to rust. You certainly don't want to just let this, like for instance, sit overnight now. Blot out as much of the water as you can. Try to get them as dry as possible, and these are really pretty dry. And I'll take some compressed air and blow each one off just to get the last little bit off. Now the next thing I'm doing is making up a little mixture of, this is WD-40. By the way, have fun cleaning your hands after the dye job. And this is chain lube. You can put a lot of lava soap, that seems to help. Good old cleanser seems to help. This is chain lube. Now I'm making a mixture of about half chain lube and half WD-40. Just making a little bit of mushy pie. Now what I'm going to do with this may seem like a lot of work to be doing just to get hinges. But when you do them this way, first off, I know what's really frustrating is, and I'll bet you everybody out there has done it at least once, you epoxy in the hinges. And believe me, I recommend nothing but epoxy. If you hot stuff them in, one always seems to get locked shut. Use white glue the first rainy day they come out. Epoxy is the way of choice. Now this mixture, and this is like a soupy mixture, the idea here is we have these hinges, they're all still a little bit wet. Even though I blew them out with compressed air, I want to take each one, and boy, this is a step you don't want to forget, and just dunk the pin in. That lets whatever water may still be in there, rotate it back, dunk it in again. Now that grease, oil, or whatever, the chain lube evaporates. It leaves a real thin coating of grease right on the pin without getting any on the hinge itself. So now when we epoxy this, we hope the epoxy won't tend to stick or run into the hinge pin. And that's a really good tip. Okay, we got all the hinges ready. Believe it or not, This takes a little longer than you think it does. I'm going to start by doing the rudder. Now, one of the things I do all the time, and I'm trying to develop a real good technique here, is I want to take the hinges and glue them into the rudder first. Using a straight edge, I'll use a straight edge to make sure they're all in complete alignment. Then I'll put this aside to dry. While that epoxy is drying, I can be working on the flap or the elevator or whatever. But what will happen is I'll have all the hinges glued into half of the side at one given time. And then I'll set that all aside to dry. Rather than try to put the hinge in both sides and trying to get them all lined up, they all seem to be crooked at some point in time. If you can get them all lined up in one complete line this way right now, you're way ahead of the game, and then putting the second half in just seems like a lot easier of a way to do it. Now I take an old number 11 blade, break the tip off, and take the parting wheel, put some scratches on it. Just X's are fine. What that does, it allows me to pick up the epoxy. I mixed up some epoxy. The kind we use is the slow drying for this. Gives me plenty of time to work the hinges in. What I want to do is I want to pick up the epoxy with this tool and shove it into the hinge pockets, get it just about the way I want it, get off the excess, and then press the hinges in. Now, of course, you just want to pick up a little epoxy on the end of this, not a whole lot either, and work it down into the hinge pocket. And of course, this is going to be redundant for the other hinges. Trying to fill that whole hinge pocket up, so even if some fuel gets in there, it's not a problem. Just wiping it off and shoving it down in there. Now I push a hinge in, take it out, make sure I have good contact. There's plenty of epoxy touching the hinge. That doesn't hurt to push it in and out a few times. Make sure it's got plenty of epoxy on it. If it doesn't, of course, just put some more on. That looks pretty good, but I still could use a little bit more. It's a really frustrating thing when a plane starts to get old. Just like when you get old, that little things start to go wrong. And one of the first things that I've seen to a lot of beautiful airplanes is the hinges either wear out or fall out, one or the other. Now with that in, I have a little jar of alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. Just take a little bit, clean off the extra epoxy. And we hope that little bit of WD-40 is going to help. Now I'll do the other ones off camera and then we'll just come back and line them up. Now with all the hinges in, I fold them all back as far as they'll go. Again, take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and just clean off the barrels. The idea here is we want to seal it and get as much of the epoxy down in where the hinge is, but not leave any up on the barrel. Flip it over, put the hinges back the other way, and you'll see a little bit more of epoxy is oozing out. It's okay, this is why I like to use the slow drying. Gives me plenty of time to work on each surface. I get rid of that Q-tips and just take a nice clean one and get the rest out. Now all the while you're doing this, you probably have to go back and forth 10-15 times to do this, but you're really sealing it because all the epoxy is running down in there now. It isn't even a bad idea if it's cool in the house or in the shop, hit it with a hairdryer. Then I want to line up the hinges to make sure they're all lined up. Any that aren't perfectly lined up, needless to say, at this point in time I can line them up. This one isn't. Try to get a nice alignment on all the hinges here. Alright, and the last thing, I'll just babysit this a little bit, maybe for 5 minutes, and just keep letting that epoxy run out. Get all the extra epoxy off. The whole idea here is you want to seal it. No matter what the situation is, you don't want any of that epoxy down in the barrel. Now, even after you're all done, what you can do is take a little more of this oil, and this is the PJ1 chain lube. You can get a little bit right on the barrel. That'll keep it, just a little bit, that'll keep it from sticking, even if you do get a little oozing out there. Flip it back the other way. I've never had a lot of real luck getting a whole hinge in at the same time. If you do half, I think you stack the odds in your favor. And having nice loose controls, boy, you can feel that at the handle right away. A lot of planes, when they're new, they have sticky controls, and as soon as they wear in after 100 flights, they're beautiful. Well, hell, why not have it nice right from the first flight? And this just requires each surface a little bit of babysitting. You can't just put this aside to dry. You got to kind of keep an eye on that you're not using your alignment. Alright, I'm working one elevator at a time. Each surface I'll mix a new batch of epoxy, so I have the whole pot life ahead of me here. I don't want to get to where I have some kind of a problem. I'm trying to get down in here and get that epoxy all the way down in there as far as it'll go. And again, enough in there that it seals, that you don't have little holes in here where fuel can get in there, raw fuel, oil, whatever. And on these, I'm trying to take the hinge itself, where we have this little, like we made a little washboard out of it. It really does contain the epoxy very nicely. It's really a good tip, good trick. Worth the price of pizza. And boy, lousy hinges are one heck of a thing to try to trim out of a plane. You usually wind up with more nose weight in a plane, and you lose the corner and everything when the hinges are sticky. Getting the hinges real nice is just ultimately important. Now again, this is one of those, like, take a little bit of that isopropyl alcohol, try to clean it up, clean around the hinge pockets. And just keep saying to yourself, Q-tips are cheap. Q-tips are cheap. Every time you spin it over, you'll see there'll be just a little more epoxy on it. The isopropyl alcohol thins it out. You hold it this way and the epoxy's running down in. Okay, the last thing that I want to do is get a little bit of the old mixture of oil and grease that we had. Grease that so even if we get a little bit that sticks, we're not going to have a problem. I don't know how many people, if you've ever glued hinges in and then went to work the controls the next day, and oh man, it's unbelievable. But this system, you know, has worked well for me, reasonably well, and let's hope you can pick that up off the tape anyway, as well as the buffing information. Now notice I'm just getting it on the barrel. I'm not getting it on the part that we're going to glue later. And I'll just babysit this along as we go. Again, take the ruler. Okay, you can just clean this off, and of course look at each piece if you have any fingerprints on it. Yeah, I got a fingerprint right here. And we'll put this aside to dry. And I'll just go right through the rest of the parts, one right after another. And then of course we'll put this aside to dry and keep babysitting it as this epoxy the next hour or so while that epoxy sets up. Now in doing the flap, I'm trying, because there's so many hinges on these flaps, I wanted that great multiple hinge look. I'm just trying to work a little bit faster. Again, this glue is taking about a half an hour to cure out, so you have enough working time, but I really am just repeating everything I've already done with the straight edge and everything, just to make sure I don't have any alignment problems that I could avoid right now. That ruler is the hot tip. Clean off the hinges, get a little lubrication on them. Just got to work a little faster because there's so many hinges. Okay, all these are dry now, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take one by one and just work each hinge. Make sure each hinge is perfectly free. While I'm doing it, I'll get a Q-tips and get a little bit of chain lube oil in there. Make sure all of the hinges are all free, and then they'll be ready to go over here, and maybe we can even get this done tonight. I don't know. Get these hinges on and let them sit overnight. Now this is another thing here. Before I even try to fit these hinges in here, I want to clean this all out, scrape all this paint off the horn. The horns all have paint on them. I want to clean that all off, so I'll do that off camera and make sure all the hinge slots are all ready to go here. Now I just want to mix up a little more of this PJ1 chain lube. This is motorcycle chain oil, in case you are not familiar with it. What it does, it evaporates once you put it in place. And right now we'd like to have that happen, obviously if we can. Mix this little batch up. And I want to take each hinge, bend it over, and again, they're still a little stiff. There's always a little bit of epoxy in them. And that chain lube soaks right in there. Now it may seem like we spend a lot of time today on these hinges, but believe me, if you have a good hinge job, boy, somewhere down the road it really pays. And if it's a lousy job, you could spend your whole life moving the controls, waiting for it to free up. Then the trick is just take each individual hinge until it's perfectly free. Move down to the next one. And I'll do the rest of them off camera so we don't eat up a lot of time. And then I want to take each surface. I want to get all that paint off the horn. Trying to get all this compound out of the corners here from the buffing job. All the paint off of the horn. Now before I set this up, I want to put this little piece of the Ray Brother linkage on here. A little ball link. Snaps right on. Make sure it's working free. I always like to do a little bit of a dry fit on here. Make sure that ball link isn't rubbing on anything. Now I'm using that same tool, that X-Acto with the scratches, to just fill up these pockets with epoxy. And I'll put a little bit of epoxy on each one of the hinges. Squeeze it together, of course, and then try to get out all the excess with a little alcohol-covered Q-tip. A lot of times the silk span right around these holes will just pick up just a little bit. Well, you can get some epoxy down underneath it.
Now, if you just happen to have a helper hanging around, which I don't, you could obviously, a good way to do this would be to stand the plane on its nose, have somebody hold it. Where's Damarel when you need him? And by doing that, of course, the epoxy would run into the notches instead of away from it. But this is okay, this way will do. And what I do, I take the Q-tips and just kind of squeeze it right on in. I want to make sure I get plenty on the horn. And of course the other three surfaces are just redundant, so we'll really only do one of these on camera, just redundantly do them over and over. Get a paper towel. Like to get all the extra off here, and of course just force it in. Now I got, needless to say, just a mirror image of what I did before. A little bit of alcohol first, get off the extra epoxy. Then a Q-tips with a little bit of that chain lube mixture on it. Now the only nuisance here is having to go back and forth flipping a model over. In the shop here, of course, we don't have unlimited room. Kind of a nuisance, so I try to do the whole thing on one side and then go to the other side. Now I have that oil, whatever you want to call it, grease, chain lube. Now I just use a bunch, and remember, Q-tips are cheap. Ask Peggy Ortiz. Come on, Peggy. Q-tips are cheap. Gummy bears are cheap. And just keep switching to new Q-tips. It'll just pick up all the extra here. And then while this is drying, we're going to be babysitting and wiping it down for the next hour or so. That feels real good. Okay, we'll flip it over and do the other side. Now another good tip here is where the epoxy's oozing out of the horn. I want to clean that up too. In fact, I see I got a little bit coming out of there now. You want all these surfaces to be sealed if possible. Now it's inevitable you're going to get some fingerprints or something on here, so before this even dries, I'll try to hit this with a clean paper towel. Maybe a little Windex or something, but for sure no wax. This paint is still hardening up. And this is really just to get the fingerprints off, because my hands are still full of that dye. You get in all the little hinge slots and all the little pockets. Now the most important thing here is, within the next amount of time, hour let's say, I'm going to babysit this. So as I do the other side and the rudder and the flaps, I'm going to constantly come back to this and make sure I have the same alignment, that nothing's moving, nothing's twisting out. If you really were afraid, you could probably put a piece of masking tape on it or something, but this fits well enough that I don't think that's even necessary. Well, I guess I mentioned this before, but I always, for each surface, mix up a new little batch of epoxy. And this is the epoxy where one tube is bigger than the other, so you get about 15 minutes to work each surface, and then 45 minutes so if you need a little minor adjustment, you can get in there and get it. Again, same thing, making sure each one of these is good and loose. I always like to dry fit everything first. Make sure there's no resistance. I want to make sure I fill that tube up where the horn is going to go. I don't want any fuel getting in there. Again, after I get this one side all cleaned up, I'll flip it over and do the other side. And then this is just a place where we have to be fussy. Make sure we don't leave any fingerprints on anything. Now I'm doing the same thing to the rudder. I like to get the rudder on. And I'm just constantly monitoring this to make sure this doesn't have any binds in it. This is really a good way to do this. It keeps a little bit of lubrication on that pin. And since we've done this all in one day, you would think there's very little chance we're going to get any rust in those pins. Just make sure each one is free. This way you can find if you get one that has a little bit of a bind in it. Now I'm just making sure all the hinges are free and clear of the epoxy, and needless to say that these are free and clear. I'll babysit this at the same time that I'm doing the flaps.
Come on, baby, take a chance with us.
Again, I'll just flip this over as soon as I get one side clean.
This is the end. Beautiful friend. This is the end. My only friend. The end. Oh, celebrate life. The end.
Make sure everything is free between installation. The last thing is the outside flap. Check that everything's free and then give it about an hour of babysitting and we'll be all set. Okay, finally got all of the hinges in. Everything's nice. Lubricated up real nice here. Controls are nice and free, and I've just been spending about the last hour or so just babysitting this guy. Trying to keep the controls nice and free. Making sure the little rudder doesn't get any glue in these hinges to speak of. And again, just babysitting it, working it back and forth constantly. Doesn't let any of the epoxy dry in there. You should always, I guess, a good way to do this is early on in the day work on it. Then later on in the day, you know, you can babysit it a little bit better than you normally would be able to. But the shine came up nice on the buffing. The hinges are in. And we're looking at another couple days of putting hardware on, tail wheel. Maybe we get to make the gear up. And again, I have that list. The list is real helpful at this point in time. Now I can just go down the list, check off things that still have to be done, and I'm hopefully closing in on having this guy done. Now this morning, these hinges have been drying overnight. I want to get some chain lube, and anybody that doesn't have a can of this, just go down to where they sell motorcycles. It's called PJ1 chain lube. You saw what we did before. We mixed it up with WD-40 because it's rather thick. Now these hinges have been sitting overnight, and before I even moved them, I want to get a little bit of this into the hinge pockets. The reason being is this stuff penetrates. I'll show this up close. This penetrates into the hinge pin, and it'll permanently lubricate it, at least you hope, for the time that the hinges are breaking in, so that on the first couple of flights you're not fighting tight controls. And again, it's real easy to use this stuff. It's kind of sloppy. It goes on like a liquid, like a foam, and what happens, the foam kind of evaporates and it leaves a material like it turns into a grease, a very thick grease that penetrates motorcycle chains. That's what this is originally made for. So what I do is I let that sit for a minute or so. I'll go out and do the other ones off camera. Just let it sit. Let's get this on a close-up lens. Now it goes on like foam, as I said before, and you just let this sit now maybe 15-20 minutes. The foam evaporates, but it's capillary. It penetrates, the foam evaporates, and it leaves grease right on the hinge pin. And this is really one of the nicest, easiest tricks. And of course you just get in there with Q-tips and wipe it off. Maybe a half hour later is plenty. This is the material, and it's something that'll make your hinging work a lot easier. PJ1 chain lube. Actually, any brand of chain lube that they sell in motorcycle shops will be fine. Now, I did all the top surfaces. I want to get all the bottom. And I'm going to let this sit for a while, and then I'm going to work the controls in. Before I go on to the next step of this project, I'd like to get the hinges loosened up and freed as much as possible. And at least, more than anything else, get some grease down into those hinge pins, so even if there's a little moisture left over from the dye job, you don't have them rusting. Don't forget, we're in a cellar, kind of humid here, things tend to rust. So the sooner I can get some grease on here, the better. Now, as you work that chain lube in, you notice within 2 or 3 minutes the controls get free as a bird. As soon as that grease works its way down in the pin. So I'll give this 5 or 6 minutes. Just relax a little and get the controls. I want the controls as free as possible when I set up the linkage for the Ray rudder. I don't want to have any binding, so that if I get a binding back at the rudder, I know that it's the rudder and not one of the other control surfaces. So it's a good idea if you have a Rabe rudder ship. Get all the hinges, and obviously I would recommend every ship have a Rabe rudder, regardless. You can feel, it's funny, you can feel almost within the time that I've been doing this on video, you can feel the controls getting looser and looser, freer and freer, to the point where it's really nice and smooth now. Now while I'm waiting for that PJ1 to soak in, I got a half an hour or so, I'll bend up the tail wheel, get all the paint off here. I got all the paint off the lead out wires too. I want to make sure those controls are as free as possible. I like to get all the paint, polish the wire, get all the paint off the wire, polish it up a little with some fine sandpaper. And maybe we even get the tail wheel bent while we're waiting for that PJ1 to soak in. Now, it's always a good idea if you bend the post of the tail wheel in at you. This way, even if the solder joint comes off, it's a pretty good guess that centrifugal force will hold the tail wheel on. Now the thing I try to do is, after all the bending, get this tweaked exactly even with the tail hinge line if I possibly can, and by sighting down it, I want to have it roughly, I don't want to have this pointed in or out, but pretty much parallel to the trailing edge. And it looks like you can tweak this back and forth, needless to say, to fine tune it. But again, it's in such a way that even if the solder joint came out, centrifugal force would hold the wheel on. Same way you do your push rod ends. Always have everything facing that centrifugal force holds them out. Now I want to get a drill that's just a little bit oversized. This is 75 thousandths wire, which really makes out to be about 77. So I'd like to get a drill that's a little over 80 thousandths. I don't want to have one of these rattly tail wheel deals. Now, just a little small tip. Whenever you drill or solder a tail wheel, always take the rubber, just pinch it off. Otherwise, you wind up chewing that hub all up. I'll take this over to the drill press and drill it out, solder it, and then put the tire back on after everything's nice and free. All right, we got a nice fit on that. Now, obviously, when we go to solder this, we're going to turn this over. Otherwise, when you solder, you'll be dripping down onto your paint job. So we want to flip it over before we solder this on. And if you do want to solder it in this dimension, lay some tin foil or something down here to catch any solder that falls. Needless to say, stay bright solder too. In fact, what I'll do, I'll take this hub off and polish it on a polishing wheel a little bit. Now what I do, the side of the tail wheel that faces the bend, I try to countersink it with an oversized drill or a countersink. It would be another good way of doing it, so that the curve in the wire doesn't start to bind on that corner. Otherwise that corner wears out rapidly, and then the wheel is flopping around like a shopping cart. So this gives you a little head start on keeping everything nice and workmanlike and neat. Now, as I do with the push rod, I file the notch in the end of the wire. This is kind of like a safety, redundant system. So even without solder, that won't come off. And then we'll just get some Stay Bright solder on here and pinch the wire off. And believe me, it can ruin your whole day. If the tail wheel comes off and you're flying on grass, you can tear that right out. It can be a problem. It's not funny. And I would say any joint, the whole airplane should be soldered with Stay Bright silver solder, no substitutes.
You always want to have the rubber of the wheel off when you do this, otherwise you wind up melting the wheel. Now, as always, some baking soda and water deflux it. Have you ever soldered a tail wheel, put the plane away, and a week later the hub didn't turn? All that sulfuric acid got in there and made a problem for you? Well, clean it off, baking soda and water. Now, you also like to take one of these Scotch-Brite pads and just get any kind of little rough edge that's on there off. When you're wiping a plane off, you don't want to have a little sharp edge that you catches your paper towels and stuff. Now, what's handy to use, this is that little wire brush wheel that comes on the end of the Dremel tool. This is a handy way to deburr that too. Now, same thing, the old PJ1 chain lube. This is a good place to get some right now. The grease will keep that hub nice and free. Let it soak in. While it's soaking in, we'll go on to some other part of the model here. Now, we're coming up on the end of this video, and the next thing we're going to do on the next tape is work on the Rabe rudder linkage. Maybe get the gear made up. I got my list over there. But now I've let this sit. This is over an hour now that this has been sitting here. So that PJ should be good and soaked in. You can wipe the excess off the paint. Again, a key thing here is for no reason at all, do not wax the airplane. Any product you put on, the best product I can think of is just Gorham's, but don't go putting any Simonize or wax or Pledge or anything on top of this paint. This paint is still gassing off. It's still getting harder by the day. And by the way, in checking this out and walking around it and everything, I found a couple more little spots I want to touch up. But we've basically got on here the minimum amount of finish I feel you could get on and still have a front row plane. So if we wanted to put on another 5 ounces of clear, well, sure, it'd probably be a little prettier, but it's certainly in that minimum amount of paint category right now. Again, any place you might have a little bit, and I've got a couple little spots here that I've touched up, or if you get some of that PJ drying up on the finish, just take it off with Gorham's, but no wax. No wax. 8 weeks, 2 months for wax. Now we're at the end of the tape, and there's just one final thing I want to put on this tape. Had a call from a guy named Bob Smith in Winthrop Harbor, and he made a very good point. He's been watching some of these tapes. In fact, he's been watching quite a few of them, and he's been picking up some good information. He's real happy with the way he's progressed in the last year or so. But he made a very valid, good point that I think we all could maybe think about for a minute. The people in this hobby that are doing this, the Joe Adamuscos, the Ski Dombrowskis, Vic Macaluso, myself, Borelli, and the list just goes on and on and on. It doesn't matter who you pick as your favorite finisher or builder or designer or whatever. All of us have one common goal, and that common goal is craftsmanship. And if we appreciate each other's craftsmanship, and I certainly would be the first one to congratulate anybody that can build one of these models, bring it in at the right weight, trim it out and have it fly well, one way or another. That's an awesome accomplishment. And having seen Joe's plane and having seen some of the other new planes that are coming out this year, I just can't say enough just how much we should all think about it. We should all take some joy in appreciating each other's accomplishments. And I certainly am congratulating everybody that's ever been able to put one of these guys into the front row. And there seems like many of the people have benefited from the videos, which makes me real happy. I'm real thrilled about it. Sometimes at night I just walk around the shop like I'm doing right now, look at this from a lot of different angles, try to get some ideas as to, you know, maybe what I could improve, any little dings or scratches I can get out. But basically it's that appreciation thing that's hard. It's always easy to think your stuff is the best or such and such a person is the best. But what I think we really ought to do is think about congratulating all the people. For everybody that's ever had a plane that's really been well built, well finished, made it to the front row, whatever their dream accomplishment was, congratulations to everybody. I think that's the thing we should be thinking about right now. And as I've said a million times before, with all this war of pipes and no pipes and all this nonsense, there's definitely room in the hobby for all of us, and we should appreciate each other's work, maybe more than we really do. So in closing, that's the end of this tape, and we'll get busy on the next tape. Thanks for watching, and hope you really have picked up some good information along the way. Share it with everybody too.